I hadn't expected moving to this quiet block to feel like stepping into a movie I wasn't ready to star in. Boxes still piled in the corners of my apartment, paint fumes clinging to my shirt. I was already regretting the decision to do it alone. The hum of the old radiator filled the silence, and somewhere across the hall, a door clicked. Someone was home. That's when I first noticed her. I was leaning over a half-assembled bookshelf, cursing under my breath, when the door opposite slid open just a crack. A pair of warm brown eyes peeked out, framed by hair that glinted gold in the afternoon sun. She was holding a cup of coffee like it was armor, shoulders squared, but something in her gaze softened when she saw me struggling with the screws. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying a faint laugh. Not mocking, just present. I froze, a screwdriver hovering midair. Maybe. I couldn't stop noticing the way her fingers curled around the mug, careful, almost ritualistic. She stepped closer, but not too close, her movements deliberate. I could smell coffee, faint vanilla, and something else, something I didn't have words for yet. She knelt down beside me without a word and held the other end of the shelf steady. We worked in silence, the only sounds the occasional click of wood and the distant hum of traffic outside. But the air between us vibrated, tiny shocks I didn't want to analyze. Every time our hands brushed, and they did, once, twice, 3 times, I felt a flicker, a spark I couldn't place. "Careful with that screw," she said finally, her voice lower, as if she were speaking to herself more than me. I nodded, pretending I was focused on the wood, but my eyes kept drifting to the faint lines around her eyes. Not flaws, exactly, but proof of a life lived. She wasn't perfect. She didn't need to be. And somehow, that made her magnetic. We finished the shelf together. She stood up, stretched, and for a second, our eyes met, holding. Not long, just long enough for the apartment to shrink, for the sunlight to pause in its tracks. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat had gone dry. She smiled, quick and unguarded, and turned back to her apartment. "Thanks." I managed, my voice rougher than intended. She tilted her head slightly, that half-smile lingering. "Don't mention it." And then she was gone, the door closing with a soft click, leaving me staring at the shelf like it had become a relic of something important. My hands were shaking, though I couldn't tell if it was the screw or the memory of that glance. Later, unpacking more boxes, I caught myself replaying the moment, her hair catching the light, the way she had just been. Not flirtatious, not teasing, just her, and somehow, it was enough to unbalance me. I found myself wondering how she lived her life, what she thought about when she sipped her coffee, whether she noticed how quiet I had become. I told myself it was nothing, just neighborly courtesy. Yet, when I closed my eyes that night, I saw her standing there, holding the shelf, smiling, like a photograph in motion, and I realized I was already waiting for the next time she'd appear. And somehow, that thought both terrified and thrilled me. I hadn't planned on seeing her again that afternoon, but fate, or stubborn curiosity, led me to cross the hall. She was on the floor, knees bent, trying to wrestle a stubborn cabinet into place. The corners of the room were stacked with boxes, tools scattered like a trail of breadcrumbs, and she looked tired. Not the kind of tired you shake off with coffee, but the deep kind that lingers in your bones. "Need some help?" I asked, careful not to sound too eager. Her eyes flicked up, guarded, quick. There was a pause, a small hesitation that didn't escape me, then a brief nod. She moved just enough for me to kneel beside her. Our shoulders brushed as we lifted the cabinet together, and I felt that same tiny jolt, the quiet electricity from before. She didn't talk much. Her lips pressed into a line when the cabinet wouldn't budge, and I noticed the way her hands worked. Delicate fingers, slightly calloused at the tips, gripping the edges like she was used to holding more than just furniture. I watched her jaw tense when she exhaled, watched her inhale slowly, almost as if she were trying to steady herself against something. I've done this a million times, and it still hates me," she admitted, voice low. Vulnerable. There was a flicker of something behind her eyes, frustration, maybe, but more than that, fatigue. The kind that comes from juggling everything alone. I didn't say anything. I just slid my hands under the cabinet, lifting slightly, letting her know I was here, steady. Her fingers brushed mine accidentally, and she froze for a moment, then pulled back quickly, cheeks tinged with color. My heart thumped harder than I expected. "Thanks," she murmured, not looking at me, eyes fixed on the cabinet like it held some great secret. We adjusted it together, and finally, it slid into place. She leaned back against the wall, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hair fell over one shoulder, and she tucked it back, slow, deliberate. I caught the faint scent of lavender and something earthy, and I realized I was memorizing it without permission. "Looks okay now," I said, trying to sound casual. She smiled, small, fleeting, almost apologetic. "Yeah, thanks for helping." Her eyes met mine briefly before darting away, and I noticed the faint curve of worry still lingering in her expression, the tension in her shoulders. For a moment, we just sat there, breathing in the same quiet room, the air heavy with something unspoken. My hand brushed against hers again. This time she didn't pull away. It was a whisper of contact, charged but tentative, and my chest tightened. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Then she shifted, glanced toward the door, and smiled softly, almost shyly, like she had just realized I was still there. That smile, it wasn't full, it wasn't flirtatious, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I could feel the pull of it, like gravity in a quiet room. And just like that, when I left, carrying the lingering scent of her coffee and lavender, I couldn't stop thinking about the way her fingers had stayed close to mine, the subtle tremor in her voice, the gentle weight of her presence that had somehow already claimed a part of my mind. The rain had started as I was walking back from the corner store, a thin drizzle turning into a steady drum on the pavement. Her door was open when I got back. She had a lamp on, casting a warm pool of light into the hallway. I hesitated, thinking I should knock, but something inside me said just step in. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers, notebooks, and an open bottle of wine. "Thought I'd try to finish these tonight," she said, voice soft, almost distracted. I crouched beside her to peek at the scattered notes. I didn't ask if I could. Somehow, I felt allowed, though I wasn't sure by what. Her eyes met mine briefly, then looked away. There was a tension in the air, subtle, almost laughable if it weren't so potent. Her hand brushed against mine while reaching for a pen. She didn't pull away, and I felt my chest tighten, the small spark from before igniting into something more complicated. "I didn't mean to bother you," I said quietly. "You're not," she replied, almost immediately, almost too quickly. There was a pause, the kind where words mean more than they say. "It's nice having company." Her gaze flicked to the rain outside, eyes distant, fingers fidgeting with the pen. I wanted to say something, tell her maybe I liked seeing her like this, maybe I liked her, but the words lodged somewhere between my stomach and my throat. So I stayed silent, close enough that I could see the faint crease of her worry lines, the tremor in her hand as she turned a page. And then her phone buzzed. A text from someone named M. She flinched, hesitated, and I caught a flicker of something she didn't want me to see. She typed quickly, then locked the phone and tucked it beside her. The room shifted instantly, the brief vulnerability replaced with a practiced calm. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't get the answer I wanted. "Yeah," she said, smiling faintly, lips pressed together. "Just work stuff." She leaned back slightly, but not entirely away from me. The closeness lingered, a charged space neither of us named. I could smell her coffee cup now, slightly bitter, slightly sweet, and it made my head spin more than the rain outside. We laughed at something small on the papers, but our laughter felt careful, measured, as if we were both testing the boundaries. My hand hovered near hers, thinking maybe I'd reach, maybe I'd brush, maybe I'd let her feel how close I wanted to be. But I didn't. I stayed just shy of crossing the line, every instinct screaming to stop, yet every heartbeat pulling me toward her. She caught my gaze, just for a second, and there it was again, the hesitation, the electricity, the secret almost waiting to be told. My chest tightened, my fingers itched, but I forced myself to look down at the papers, pretending that the storm outside and the quiet room were the only things that mattered. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that, if I just moved a little closer, we might tip over some unspoken edge, and neither of us would ever be the same. I found her on the balcony that evening, the city lights blurring beneath the drizzle. She had her arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing in particular. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and the jasmine that climbed along her railing. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should intrude or just let her be. "You think too much," I said finally, softer than I intended, and immediately wished I hadn't. She didn't turn. A pause stretched between us, heavy and slow, like the world itself had slowed down to let the weight settle. "Maybe," she said, voice careful, almost brittle. Then, after a long moment, "Or maybe I'm just tired of pretending everything's normal." I swallowed, feeling it lodge in my chest. Normal isn't really what this is it? Her laugh was bitter, a sharp exhale that made my stomach twist. "No, it isn't. And that's terrifying." She finally turned to me, eyes glistening, not quite tears, but close enough to make my throat go dry. The vulnerability she let slip for a moment was a shock. She looked older, yes, wiser, but also smaller somehow, less guarded than before, and I could see the strain she carried like invisible bricks on her shoulders. "I don't know what we're doing," she admitted. Her voice shook, not in anger or frustration, just confusion. I realized I didn't either. All the brushes of hands, shared silences, fleeting sparks, what were they building toward? And did either of us dare to name it? I stepped closer, slow, careful. Not to touch, not to close the distance, but just to be there. The quiet between us hummed, louder than any word I could offer. I noticed the way her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve, the slight tremor in her jaw as she exhaled. Every micro-movement spoke more than the conversation ever could. "Do you ever feel like we're pretending?" I asked, voice low, almost a whisper. Her gaze fell, and she shook her head lightly, eyes fixed on the night below. "All the time," she murmured. "And I hate that I like it. That I keep coming back to it." I didn't move, didn't speak, just let her words hang between us like smoke. The street below was quiet, the rain soft, the city breathing. I realized that I was terrified, not of her, not of myself, but of what this unspoken tension meant. What lines we were skating along without ever naming. What truths we were avoiding because we couldn't afford them. She finally looked at me again, voice small, trembling, almost unrecognizable. "I don't want to ruin anything. But I also don't know how to stop thinking about it." I wanted to reach out, wanted to tell her it was okay, that I felt the same, but the words died before they left my lips. We stood there, side by side, not touching, suspended in a silence so thick it pressed against our chests. Then she whispered, almost to herself, almost to the night, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to be this careful anymore." And in that quiet, in that tremor of a line, I realized we had already crossed some invisible threshold, and there was no turning back. I didn't expect her to open up that evening. We were sitting on the worn couch in her living room, the muted glow of a single lamp casting shadows across the room. The rain had stopped, leaving a damp chill in the air. She handed me a cup of tea without looking at me, fingers brushing mine for the briefest instant. "You ever lose someone you thought would always be there?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. Her eyes were fixed on the steam curling from the cup, the faint tremor in her voice betraying something she was trying to keep tucked away. I nodded slowly, unsure if she wanted an answer. "Yeah, once. A long time ago." Her hand tightened around the cup. I thought I'd never get past it, that some part of me would always be waiting. Her voice cracked at the last word, small, almost inaudible. I felt my chest constrict, suddenly hyper-aware of the space between us, the unspoken weight of everything she had just let slip. She reached into the side table and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed at the edges, the handwriting unmistakably hers. I found this the other day," she said, voice trembling. "I thought I'd buried it. Thought I was done." She hesitated, then placed it gently between us. "It's him." I picked it up, careful not to make it seem like I wanted to pry. though my fingers lingered on the paper. I could feel the tremor in hers, the way her body was trying to hold itself together. The letter wasn't dramatic. There were no angry confessions, no wild declarations, just simple words, quiet and earnest, but heavy with a grief that had shaped her life. "I never showed anyone," she said, voice low. "Never wanted anyone to know how much it hurt. I thought I'd moved on." She paused, and I watched her shoulders slump, the careful armor she wore all day falling away for just a second. I wanted to say something, but there were no perfect words. So I stayed quiet, watching her, noticing the way her lips pressed together, the faint redness around her eyes, the subtle way her hands shook even as she rested them in her lap. My heart ached for her, but not in pity. For the first time, I realized how much she carried, how much of herself she'd kept buried and still chose to keep living. She started, then stopped, eyes flicking toward mine with a vulnerability that made my own pulse race. I could almost feel the ghost of her past heartbreak hovering between us, a presence we weren't allowed to name. I handed the letter back, and our fingers brushed again. This time, longer, deliberate, charged with a quiet electricity neither of us spoke aloud. Her gaze met mine, steady, raw, and I realized something had shifted, not between us exactly, but in her and me. The air between us felt heavier, sweeter, and more dangerous in a way I hadn't anticipated. She exhaled, almost a whisper. I thought I was done, but maybe some part of me wasn't ready to let go. And in that moment, sitting together in the dim light, I felt the ground shift under my own chest. I didn't need her to say anything else. I didn't need her to look at me differently. It was enough that the past had been revealed, fragile and real, and that now, somehow, we were both standing on its edge, trembling, unsteady, and maybe capable of something neither of us had expected. We didn't speak for the first few minutes after I arrived that evening. The apartment smelled faintly of rain and jasmine, the same as before, but something had shifted, heavier, warmer, more insistent. She was sitting cross-legged on the rug, papers forgotten, and I realized I had been holding my breath without knowing it. "Sit," she said finally, voice low. Not a command, not an invitation exactly, just a statement. I did, careful to leave a small space between us. She didn't move closer, and I didn't push, though every instinct wanted to close the distance. We sat like that for a long while, watching the faint glow of the streetlights spill across the floor. No words, no explanations, just the quiet thrum of presence. And yet, everything felt magnified. The small scrape of her fingers against the carpet as she shifted, the way her hair fell into her eyes, the tiny sigh she couldn't quite suppress. "I wasn't sure how to be here," she said after a long silence. "With someone who notices." I didn't answer immediately. I just let my gaze linger on her, memorizing the curve of her shoulders, the way she leaned slightly forward as if bracing herself for something. "Finally," I said, "you don't have to do anything but be here." Her lips quirked in a faint, almost embarrassed smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes entirely but softened them. She shifted closer, ever so slightly, until the warmth of her knee brushed mine. I felt my chest tighten, a slow, steady pulse of inevitability. The first touch wasn't dramatic. My fingers brushed against hers, lingering just enough for us to notice. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. It was a small gesture, almost accidental, but it held the weight of everything that had passed, the quiet tension, the near confessions, the unspoken desires. We didn't speak for a long moment after that. Instead, we just breathed, our rhythms aligning almost imperceptibly. She leaned her head briefly toward me, not resting it fully, just enough to make me aware of the soft warmth of her hair against my hand. My fingers moved slightly, brushing back the strand that fell over her temple, a tiny motion, intimate and careful. I realized then that it didn't matter who was older, who had experienced more, who had held heartbreak closest. It didn't matter how improbable this was, or how fragile we might feel. Sitting there, just like this, it felt like the only place either of us wanted to be. "I think I understand now," she murmured, voice soft, steady, more certain than I had ever heard it. I don't want to overthink it. I nodded. Neither of us needed to say more. The moment had already said everything. The shared space, the quiet acknowledgement, the delicate trust. Her hand shifted slightly, finding mine fully this time. We let it rest there, simple, anchored. No grand gestures. No proclamations. Just presence. And as the city hummed softly outside, the rain long gone, I knew we had crossed the threshold. Not with fireworks or dramatic revelation, but with quiet inevitability, the kind that comes when two people finally stop running from what has been waiting for them all along. We stayed like that, silent, together, letting the world continue without us, and it felt enough. It's been months since that night, the night the quiet finally settled between us, when words became less necessary than the weight of shared presence. I sit now in my apartment, boxes unpacked, not because I need to, but because life finally feels like something I can breathe in again. I think about her often, not obsessively, not painfully, but with that gentle pull that lingers long after a moment has passed. She taught me something I didn't expect. That connection isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it's the tiny, unguarded instants that leave the deepest mark. A hand brushing against yours, a glance that lasts a heartbeat too long, the shared silence that feels like a conversation all its own. She changed, too. I see it in the way she moves through her days now, shoulders lighter, laughter softer, but no less real. There's a confidence in her that wasn't born from perfection, but from having allowed herself to be known, in fragments, to someone who mattered. I realize now that she didn't need me to save her, to fix her past, or to make her life better. She only needed someone willing to notice, and somehow, in doing that, I found myself noticed as well. I remember the letter she showed me, the little tremble in her hands, the faint fear in her eyes. And I remember my own hesitation, the long moments when I wanted to reach and didn't, or reached too carefully. Those fragments built something neither of us could articulate at first, but something so real that it didn't need words. I've learned a lot about love in this quiet way, about patience, about vulnerability, about the strange beauty of letting someone in slowly, letting them leave their walls down piece by piece, and understanding that the slow burn is worth more than any sudden flame. Even now, when I walk past her apartment in the hallway or hear the soft clink of her coffee cup from across the building, there's a flicker of that same thrill, the subtle reminder of the electricity that started it all. But it's no longer frantic or confusing. It's steady, warm, earned. And sometimes, I catch myself smiling at the memory of our first awkward shelf, the late-night rain, her hand brushing against mine on the couch. Those moments feel like home now, stitched into the fabric of who we are together, or at least, who we've become as individuals changed by each other. I suppose that's the thing about slow-burning love. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives quietly, and when it does, you notice in every small gesture afterward, in the way the world seems slightly softer, slightly more alive. So here we are, still learning, still growing, still noticing each other in ways that matter. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Have you ever experienced a connection so small, so quiet, yet so impossibly impossible to forget?